Now we are going to listen a very complicated issue, responsive design. Responsive design. Especially for designers, it has always been difficult to differentiate and compare responsive design or adaptive design or similar terms. Tomorrow, he's also going to conduct a workshop about responsive design workflow and strategies. Please welcome Editor-in-Chief, co-founder for Smashing Magazine, Vitaly Friedman.
Merhaba, Istanbul. All right, that's better. Ah, come on, we're trending 4th on Twitter. We should be better than that. Can you get really loud? Who is really happy to be here today? All right? Huh, that's better. Now, who knows Smashing Magazine? Please keep your hands up. Oh, you over there, please keep your hands up. That's not okay. All right, now have a nice picture to post so we can get 3rd on Twitter. That's good. All right, so I'm very happy to be here today. Istanbul is amazing. I mean, I have no idea how you live here because of the cars and traffic, seriously. But I kind of get it because of the food. The food is just freaking unbelievable. All right, we're not about to talk about that. Responsive design, of course. Now, my name is Vitaly, and I'm co-founder of Smashing Magazine, online magazine for designers and developers. And most of the time, I actually do write and read and edit articles on the magazine. But also, I spend a lot of time doing a lot of consulting work these days, mostly front-end performance optimization stuff, but also UX stuff, and mostly related to responsive web design. Now, when I'm brought in as a consultant, I don't have a lot of time to produce results. It forces me to be really, really effective when it comes to responsive design. Now, maybe I have 3 or 4 days to produce functional prototypes. Now, if you think about responsive design, many think that it's really complex, it's really difficult, and it's really, really hard to get things done in time. So I'd like to share with you today a few things that really, really work well for me, and what I kind of learned from my own experience, and that might work well for you as well. So this is about workflow, also a few design patterns, but more specifically, and I can't emphasize how important it is, it's about what I saw working in real-life projects. Because I really don't care about things that are supposed to work, right? I care about things that actually has worked or proved their efficiency. So, how do I work? I can watch it all day long. It's so cute. Isn't it? Come on, seriously? Anything? All right, whatever. So what's really important, I think, in the most companies that I worked with, is the design process that I also encounter or stumble upon is just not right. Now, as Mark said, the design process is weird and complicated because it involves people and organizations which often are weird and complicated. I don't know if it's true for Turkey, but it's totally true for Germany, which is where I encounter it all the time. Now, the reason for that is that many people in the companies think that this is a creative process, right? It's a series of iterations, successive iterations, which eventually lead to a result. Now, I think this is misleading, because this is just not true. Because for me personally, it's more like this. I start somewhere, and then I hit a dead end, and then I have to try again and find myself again, right? And this is the point where I also lose most time, right? Those dead ends where I have to rethink and start new is where I lose time. And because I want to be efficient, I have to minimize it. Now, there are ways of doing that, right? One of them is design patterns. This is what we're going to do tomorrow in the workshop, which kind of help you recover from them. But this is not quite right on its own, because this is responsive design as we see it today. I don't like this traditional image of a screen resolution being adjusted to different, layout being adjusted to different screens. Because for me personally, we have many dimensions in responsive design: performance, accessibility, navigation, web form design, all those things, right? And what we as designers have to do today is to put just the right dots in just the right places across all of those dimensions to create a system that scales up and down as we wish. which makes it very, very hard if you think about it. So this is how I see responsive design in every single project I worked on. And there are many things to keep in mind, right? The complexity is enormous. Think about all the components we have to keep in mind. Flexible grid, navigation, form controls, carousels, accordions, drop-downs, paginations, media lists, thumbnails, graphs, charts, iframes, third-party content, tables, data grids, and many more, right? We also have to be strategic about how we approach design in terms of responsive images, legacy browser support. How many of you have to deal with i8 every single day? Internet Explorer 8? Not many. That's good. Also, responsive advertising, scalability, offline access, right? There are so many things to keep in mind. But that's not it, because at some point, we have to think about layouts as well, right? Be it ad-directed features, checkout flow, sign-up flow, FAQ page, and so on. So we need to break down this complexity with a system. And my system is atomic design. And how many of you are familiar with the concept of atomic design? Few of you. Now, per se, the system is not difficult. The approach is not difficult. But it kind of makes a little difference when you think about how to use it. So here's what it looks like. When you start a project, you always have 5 different phases when you build a new product, which are atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, and pages. When you start, you don't start big. You start very small. You start thinking about the atoms or the smallest compound units that you have on the web. Things like buttons or like little text area or maybe a table, right? You combine these components together, you create a molecule, you combine molecule together, you create an organism, you combine organisms, you create a template, and then you add real content and you have your page. Now this might not seem like a big deal, right? Especially if you look at the example. Well, we start with atoms, which are just small things like label, input, and the button. We combine them, we create a molecule, which is a search box, right? We combine multiple molecules together. Well, we create an organism like a header, right, with the logo and the navigation, the search box. Multiple organisms brought together create a template, which looks like a wireframe, right? And then we add real content, and we have a page. Now, this might not sound like a really groundbreaking deal, but the main difference here is that when we start designing, we never think about the page. Because whenever we start thinking about the page, it's always a trap. Because it leads you to all the conversation about what goes on the page, all the different components on the page, and all the different responsive views for that page. The page is the result of what you're doing, what you're building or designing. It's not what you are designing. And that's the main difference, right? So when you start small. So you don't go to Photoshop and you don't create a new canvas size of, I don't know, 1,200 pixels times 1,000 pixels, but instead you create a new Photoshop file size, canvas, of maybe 5,000 pixels times 5,000 pixels, and you start designing those components first. And then you put them together to actually start building a page. And the reason why you do that is because it helps you to break down the complexity by combining things very much like Lego blocks from very small to very big. But this is not quite what we do in the very start, right? From the developers' point of view, that's very, very beneficial because you can really create scalable systems. It helps you to create scalable systems. But what we start with is something slightly different. We start planning. In fact, I would argue that many projects that I work on, probably 60% of the time goes into planning and only 40% in design and building. We spend much more time in planning because we can't afford making mistakes down the line. We just can't, right? So we have to make things right from the beginning. And the way we do it is by spending a bit more time thinking about what we're going to do. So what we decided to do over the last year, for example, is introducing this concept of core content and core feature priority lists, where we just list a step, list important things, be it tasks or pages or features, and simply identify what priorities they have in the process. So this is what it looks like, and it's very boring. It's not exciting at all. It's not visual design, right? But it's really helpful. So what we do is listing down all the different things that we feel are important for the user, and we ask the client to actually mark the importance for those pages. Now, if you ask the client what is important and what's not important, they will not know what to tell you, because everything is important, right? But if you ask them what is more important than others, kind of producing relative importance, it really produces results. You ask for primary importance, you ask for secondary importance, you ask for tertiary importance. And once you have that, personally, primary importance for me means important, and secondary importance means not so important, right? But it really helps because you know exactly what to focus on. What we do then, though, is again not designing. We design in a text editor first. We open a text editor and we start writing. And it helps because you actually have to formulate the goals, objectives, and the language of the project, and it really forces you to understand exactly what's going on, what's important for the user, and what's important for the business. So this is what my first sketch looks like, if you like. We open a text editor, and we start writing the navigation, the copy, microcopy, and stuff like that. Sometimes even micro-interactions, right? Like a pop-up button that would appear where you can select where you submit data or not, right? Things like that. So we do a lot of sketching in a text editor, and specifically not in Photoshop or any other tool, just because it really forces you to focus. We also sometimes come up with those manifestos, which might sound, you know, a bit exaggeration, but it helps you really to write down, to really nail down what you want to build. So you set your goals, and you set the directive of where you're heading, and how you're going to do it, right? It could be just maybe 4 to 6 sentences, right? Clearly explaining your vision, if you like, and also explaining what you're doing and what you're not doing. We also do performance and UX budgets, which again help just settle the right expectations. Now, have you heard of performance budgets before, or UX budgets before? Now, performance budget is basically just a concept where you tell exactly how fast you want to be. Now, everybody wants to be at least as fast as the competitor, right? So the way, actually, the speed of the competitor is usually a very good indicator of how fast you have to be, at least in the worst case, right? And you might want to be slightly faster, right? So as you write down the goals, like start rendering under 1 second on, I don't know, on a DSL connection in Istanbul in Turkey, or start rendering under 1.5 seconds on 3G here in Istanbul in Turkey. It really drives your design decisions, because every single time somebody comes up with a feature they want to implement, there are 3 options. First option, well, you try to fit in within the budget, which might not work or might work. The second option is remove something else that you already built and make room for that feature, which often doesn't work. And the third one is just don't add the new feature, right? And it works like charm every single time, right? And what it forces you is really to focus on what matters and get fast, whatever it costs, whatever it matters, whatever it means. And again, this is what it would look like, where you just collect some metrics about how fast you are, and you can do it for performance, but also for UX, where you try to identify critical tasks. For example, how much time maximum should a user spend in a checkout? Let's say 40, 45 seconds, right? So what it tells you then, after 40 seconds, you have to react. So what we did for the smashing shop, for example, is we say, okay, 40 seconds is a threshold. It's a maximum, right? So after 40 seconds, if a person is still in the checkout, we're going to pop up a little, pop-up, telling the person that they will get $5 discount on this very purchase if they actually complete it right away, right? 100% conversion rate. Everybody goes to the very end. And the reason why they do, because we thought about what might happen when they start feeling unhappy at the moment when they start feeling unhappy, right? And react to that. Very much like many talks we listen to today as well. When we start designing then, we start actually taking screenshots, producing visual inventory, where we just look into different styles and directions. And this is where we're getting from planning into actual design, right? Where we do this visual inventory, where we just take screenshots of different visual styles that we could go into, right? And this is just showing that to the client helps already to facilitate and initiate a really fruitful conversation without you having to do any mock-ups or prototypes or anything else, right? It's just extremely fast. Because in the end, you really want to get to the highest fidelity in the shortest amount of time, right? And then we set Photoshop in a big canvas, and we start creating those components first, with atomic design in mind, right? And it doesn't look like a page, right? It's just a set of components put together, but it actually helps you to communicate with the client about the direction that you're heading in. So what we do then is setting up a project hub with one URL that you give to your client, and it has pretty much everything your client needs, starting from early mockups, drafts, performance results, conversion results, any kind of usability testing, stuff like that. Pretty much everything they need in one single place, listed chronologically. So the newest updates are always on the top, and the oldest are always at the bottom. And as you keep iterating and improving, well, this is exactly what they're working on. So when you start designing, again, you go Photoshop, big canvas, start designing components, right? And this is what it could look like. Just a big fat image exported from Photoshop, put on a screen, on a page, right? And obviously, this is, again, not a website, right? But it really helps you to actually have a meaningful conversation without having to spend too much time designing this, right? And has some critical components that are important for a given website, right? And when you have enough of those components, you actually can go ahead and start designing a page, right? But again, this is not what you're starting with. And you keep refining it until at some point you have enough components so you can actually pick a page to prototype. And then we actually pick a page, usually not a home page, but an important page. Maybe if it's a newspaper, it's going to be an article page. If it's an e-commerce site, it's going to be checkout and maybe a product page, right? And then we start prototyping. And at this point, we start thinking about the layout, exact layout, and the grid, and how it's going to be built. So we also use this little tool, which is a responsive breakpoint diagram, where we have different components on the left side, right? And different breakpoints on the other side. And we have 6 breakpoints here, XS, small, medium, large, X large, and XX large. And they are artificial. Before we start prototyping, we don't know how many breakpoints we're going to have. But just by setting those 2 dimensions and kind of putting this component somewhere in between, we could say, well, this component is going to be collapsible, the header, is going to be collapsible between XS and medium, and it's going to be full with flyouts between large and XX large, right? And XS is obviously something very, very small, mobile screen. XX large is something TV screen, maybe something very large. And then something in between is, something in between, right? And between medium and large, we have a transition from tablet to desktop, right? And again, this really just facilitates conversation without having to build or design anything, which is great. Please, right? And what we also do sometimes, because we have to prototype really, really fast, is using this spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is really helpful. It lists all of the different components from different frameworks and from different pattern libraries on the one side, and those actual pattern libraries on the right side. So if you need to prototype something very quickly to show it to the client, you can, let's say, currency selector or something like that, right? You just search for currency selector in here, which happens to be somewhere in line 100, whatever, right? And you look at how many frameworks have it implemented already, or maybe how many different style guides have implemented that already, and you pick it, and you might skin it to be able to have a really meaningful conversation with the client about how it's going to work, what the interaction is going to look like, right? So here we've got currency selector, which is available only in one framework, which you find, and then you can actually look into it in detail without you having to prototype it from scratch. Sometimes you will have to do it, but sometimes you don't have to, right? And then we also use website style guide resources for that, which also has lots of different libraries already mentioned in there. And as a prototype, we use those tools like Living Style Guide or KSS or Style Doco, which all work the same way, where what we do is we write down a few lines of documentation as we do prototyping, right? And this documentation is then being used by the system to generate these pattern libraries or these references with a huge list of components for you on the fly every single time you deploy a commit. So you don't have to maintain it, right? It lives in the code, right? So you can create things like that where you have all colors, all type treatments, all components listed, on one page automatically without you having to maintain it. Right? And it's the same story with redesigns. It's just with redesign, we also create an interface inventory where we actually look at all the different things that exist on the site. So I'm not a control freak, as you will find out tomorrow, but I like to have things under control, right? So I really hate this feeling when I come to a website and I touch the code base and I don't know what's going to happen next. If I remove this class, or if I change this component, will things break or not, right? So I need to have kind of a really good understanding of what's going on. So what we do before, when we start the redesign, is before following this process that I showed, we actually just look at all the different pages we have. Because you want to make sense of it all, right? If you have 4 different Learn More buttons, is there a reason for 4 different Learn More buttons? Or maybe we need only 2, or maybe we need only 1, right? So we group them all together, we take lots of screenshots, we do a lot of tagging, and we put them in a template. We have a Keynote template with 16 different pages, one called buttons, the other called tables, the other called lightboxes, and so on. Just to really bring it all down in a consistent fashion, right? And then sort them by color, sometimes by form, sometimes by purpose, to create something that really scales up and down, something that we can understand and design, right? And you can also use these 2 templates, Interface Inventory, and this is also an article on interface inventories by Aaron Gustafsson, as you will see in the slides. So what does it mean for us? Sorry, this is not so important. You can think about the entire process that I described as mise en place, right? Where you have all the different ingredients placed out. So when somebody enters a restaurant, the chef doesn't have to prepare a meal right on, right there, because everything is prepared already. He doesn't have to start from scratch. So maybe when we start designing, we can line out our components, break down the complexity by actually introducing those little atoms, combining them together, and combining them further into more complex modules by starting very small, like here, and then preparing a very delicious dish just by putting things together all the time, right? Because you might think, okay, who thinks that this might work? All right, who thinks it will never work? It's impossible, it's totally crazy, out of control, I want to leave now. Okay, nobody? That's good. Because it has been done. Here's a nice example for that. Could I also have audio, please? Oh, damn it. And action. So, can we turn it down a little bit? So, the idea here is, this is an end design agency from Barcelona, and the task was to come up with a new digital identity for a TV channel in France. Now, this TV channel was mostly dedicated to teenagers, right? But they wanted to create something new, something fresh. So what I decided to do is go to archives, footage archives of the channel, and started looking at VHS cassettes, right? And started looking specifically at those itches, things that go wrong, like distorted pixels, glitches, right? Things like that. And I classified it, so I recreated all of it in After Effects, creating something like a library of all of those, effects in place. So the identity was not just one single MOV file that they would deliver, but rather a dashboard with an actual tool that would generate those, patterns, that glitches on the fly, randomly. So whenever a new program or a new TV show comes in, right, this will just pull one of the glitches, combine those glitches together, and create this unique identity just on spot. Every single time it's going to be unique, right? So the deliverable was, again, not just one final thing, not just one final page as we do, right? But just a set of components, or set of effects in that case, that actually make up the entire experience, right? So I think that responsive design isn't really difficult. It's not complex. It's not inefficient. If you have a good team, a good process, and maybe a set of design patterns that you can rely on. And if you have that, you can produce really damn good results within a few days. With that in mind, thank you, and let's have a good lunch.